The member from Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question to the acting Premier. The Ontario government used to fund 50% of transit net operating costs in a successful funding formula that ensured high-quality service. This funding was cut by the Conservatives, and it stayed cut under the Liberals. Municipalities and transit advocates like TTC riders have repeatedly asked for this funding to be restored. Why has the Premier repeatedly refused?
Thank you. Acting Premier.
Speaker, Minister of Economic Development and Growth, on behalf of Minister of Transportation.
Thanks very much,
Minister.
Speaker. I thank the member for his question. I know he and others in the NDP caucus have raised this a number of times over the last couple of years. What they fail to comprehend in the way they ask their questions, Speaker, is that this government is investing more in public transit infrastructure in the City of Toronto and across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and in every community across Ontario that has public transit, more so than any other government in Ontario history, Speaker. And in fact, just a number of months ago, we started to double the amount of gas tax money that the communities that are supporting public transit themselves locally receive, Speaker, over the next couple of years, that gas tax funding to specifically support expanding public transit and support public transit service in those communities will double, Speaker. This is a significant step forward with respect to supporting those communities and their transit needs, while at the same time, Speaker, we continue to invest in the infrastructure, and I'll be delighted to provide more details on that in the follow-up answers.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Well, you'd think, Speaker, from that response that everything is dealt with. Oh, yeah. But in fact, subways in Toronto are filled to crush capacity. That's right. Bus routes have been cut, and service on remaining routes keeps getting less frequent and reliable. Meanwhile, fares are going up, while services are getting to be worse. No wonder so many people think that their only option is the car. But the Premier has the ability to change this. She can restore the province's traditional 50% funding for net transit operating costs and improve service not in 10 or 20 years, but today. Why won't she?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, Speaker, as I mentioned in my initial answer to the first question that came from the NDP caucus on this, here are just some of the things that our government's invested in, specifically in the 416, specifically in Toronto as it relates to public transit. So, for example, $3.7 billion for GO Regional Express Rail here in Toronto alone, which will help to support and enable Smart Track. $5.3 billion to build the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, single largest public transit project in Ontario history. Almost $2 billion to continue to expand rapid transit in wonderful Scarborough, Speaker. $974 million from the Move Ontario Trust for the Toronto-York Spadina subway extension, which opened in Vaughan last December, Speaker. $456 million to build out the Union Pearson Express, and specifically to the gas tax funding I alluded to earlier, $2.1 billion since 2004 for the City of Toronto alone to help support transit operations, Speaker. And I look forward to talking about more of the good news we've delivered to the people of Toronto for transit in the final answer.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker, and again to the acting Premier. That answer is why people are so cynical about public transit. The Premier will run publicly funded ads boasting about how much he cares about transit riders. But on the buses, on the subways, and on the streetcars, transit riders know the truth. Service has gotten worse while fares have become more expensive. The Premier can change this. She can restore public confidence in transit. She can improve transit service today. She can restore provincial funding for transit operations as the NDP has committed. Why won't she?
Minister.
Speaker, I mentioned a second ago that there's more. So, for example, here in the City of Toronto, our government investing $416 million to support the purchase of brand new streetcars. Starting in early 2019, Speaker, all GO Transit trips within Toronto specifically will only cost Presto card users $3 per trip, Speaker, which means represent and speak for, we're making their transit more affordable. That's what our government's doing, Speaker. And just this morning, maybe the member didn't know this, the Premier and the Minister of Transportation joined with Meritori and others to sign an MOU to commit provincial funding to the Downtown Relief Line, to the Yonge North Subway Extension, to more transit in Scarborough, Speaker, to the Waterfront LRT. That's what our government
government's doing while you're busy talking.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please.